Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the Ferrum WANDLA. This is a 2,800 US dollar digital to analog converter. This was a loan to me along with the 1,195 US dollar Hypsos power supply that matches. These were loans to me from Audio 46. Audio 46 has made no attempt to influence my opinion on this review, so all thoughts that you are about to hear are mine and mine alone. The link where you can buy these products down in the description below will be an affiliate link though, so if you like what I have to say about these products and you are interested in buying them, please consider using that affiliate link and I will get a small kickback. All right. This is a fully balanced unit that is exciting because it uses digital filters in it from Shameless, who is the maker of HQ Player and upsampling. So that's like one of the unique features of this unit that makes it particularly intriguing. And I should say this is not the Golden Sound edition. This is the stock or OG edition, if you will. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll be able to take a look at Golden Sound's edition in the future as well. But for now, just the OG. So let's go ahead and do shameless self-promotion, and then we will talk about the WANDLA.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style, and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
The observant among you may notice that just slightly off camera here, I have another Hypsos and a matching Ferrum ore over here. Those were loans from a friend of the channel so that I could talk about how these units interact with each other. And I got two Hypsoses because, Hypdos, is that what we would call two Hypsoses? Anyway, all right, I got two Hypsoses to go along with this here, which is not strictly necessary. Ferrum does offer a power cord splitter, if you will, where you can power both an ore and a WANDLA off of a single Hypsos unit using a splitter and an additional power cord that comes with it. That device is $295 US dollars, and I didn't want to drop $300 on that just for a review. So Audio 46 was kind enough to loan me a Hypsos, and then my friend was kind enough to loan me a Hypsos to go along with the ore as well. So that's why that is there. And also you can expect from me in the near future, very near future here, kind of a re-review of the ore since I got to spend more time with that and with additional headphones that I didn't get to use because I just didn't have them when I did my initial review of it back, I want to say almost 2 years ago now. Okay, at least a year and a half, somewhere in there. Okay, such as the Focal Utopia, which I have sitting right there. So keep an eye out for that in the near future as well. All right. So back to the WANDLA, and really quick, my takeaway here, because we could be here a while, there's a lot of ground to cover on this because there's a lot of things to talk about. My takeaway on this is that from a sonic perspective, this is an excellent DAC. It is the first DAC that has sonically made me look at my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 that I personally use as a reference and think, do I really need you? Okay, and I ultimately did conclude that yes, I still need the Berkeley and I'm still happy to hang on to it, but the combinations of performance and features on this unit actually got me to seriously consider whether I wanted to make a change. All right, so that's sonically. There are a couple of software quirks in this thing that we need to talk about too that may or may not be deal breakers for some of you out there, but we will cover all of that in due course. So, shall we dive in? Sure, let's dive in. Specs on this thing. The decoding options on this are manifold. It is built around an ESS ES9038 Pro DAC chip, and it can decode up to 32-bit 768 kilohertz PCM files and DSD up to DSD 256. It will accept and decode all of those input formats from both the USB and the I2S inputs. I will show you the full complement of connections when we do the unit tour here in just a moment, but they are plenty. And again, one of the stars of the show of this unit is the fact that Shameless partnered with Ferrum to do the digital filters on this. And there are several digital filters on this unit. I don't know the exact number, but there are plenty of them in there. And they really do matter. They are really well done. They all change the sound very subtly, but very noticeably, so that you can do a fair amount of customization in the sound with this unit. So again, that is one of the key features that this DAC offers, is that they use digital filters from the same folks who made HQ Player, which means really high quality digital filtering at that. So key selling point, it's got it. Okay. We'll go ahead and cut to the unit tour here in a moment, but I just say, like, it is a smaller footprint DAC, which is nice. It comes with a remote control, all that, which I'll show you a closer look at in just a moment. It is also a preamp, and it has an analog input on it too, so that you can more comfortably and conveniently integrate an analog source into your digital front end here as well. In case you're a vinyl fan and you have that sitting around, there's a way you can do that, which we'll talk about in the unit tour as well. And really, without further ado, I think it's probably appropriate to dive into that unit tour, so let's go ahead and do that. Quick unit tour. We have the front panel of the Wandla here, and it's pretty simple. Here's Hypsos power supply. This is the DAC itself right here. And I have these indicator lights here, these LEDs on different brightnesses, just to show that these are adjustable. There are ways that you can adjust the brightness in the menu in case the brightness of that bothers you. But mostly a touchscreen interface here on the DAC itself. It is a preamp too, so we have variable output level, so you get a volume knob here, and like this is not a button, it's just a volume knob basically there. And you just navigate the menu here from the touchscreen. So we've got all of our input options. I mean, it's pretty intuitive. It works basically just like you would think it does. You know, in all of these years now we've had training using smartphones and tablets and that sort of thing. Mute button there. And then we have all kinds of options here. Like here are the digital filters. Okay, and there's an output balance, and there's I2S input assignments and all of that kind of stuff going on here. Okay, these output filters, or these digital filters, I should say, like really do make a difference, right? Here we go. I should say here are the filters. Okay. Amongst DACs that I have had come through here that have different digital filters on them, these make the most audible changes to me. I'm not saying it's the only one that makes audible changes, just like the magnitude of the changes of these filters are the biggest to me. And like I noticed some interesting things, like my Susvara liked the HQ appetizing filter here. My Utopia seemed to respond best to the ESS linear phase filter, and so forth. And what I like about this interface is that you can direct select these things rather than hitting a button and cycling through them. And they make changes pretty quick, so you can go back and forth between specific filters and hear the difference that is made relatively quickly. Whereas a lot of other DACs that I've had come through here, they've got a button that you've got to cycle through all of them, and sometimes you hear changes and sometimes you don't, and it's really hard to go back and forth. But that's the interfacing. I think, again, it's pretty intuitive, it's pretty slick, and so forth. And so, yeah, that is the front panel of the unit. Let's look at the back panel. Okay, back panel. Obviously, I have a few things plugged in. That's okay. What we have here up top is the proprietary 4-pin connector for the connection to the Hypsos power supply with the supplied, this comes with the Hypsos, the supplied power cord that comes with that. Right underneath that, we do have the DC input for the stock power brick, which really is just a stock power brick that looks like that. And, you know, it's got the DC plug on it and so forth. Let's see, this thing is a, what's the voltage on this? Probably similar to what the Hypsos kicks out. 24 volt, 2.5 amp, 60 watt power brick, but there's nothing special about it, right? And there are audible differences going from that power brick to the Hypsos power supply, which we'll talk about in the sound section and all of that. But rest of the back panel, a DC trigger output if you want to connect this to something else to power on and off. We have a USB-C port right here for USB audio in. This is also how you do firmware updates, by connecting this to a computer and installing some software to do firmware updates and that sort of thing. We have two HDMI style ports here. We have one that is the I2S input, and then we have another one that is the HDMI ARC. Okay, for connecting to a television set that's got HDMI, audio return channel, or ARC, equipped on it. That's the one you would use for that. We've got 3 flavors of SPDIF input: RCA coaxial, Toast-Link fiber optic, and then AES, which is SPDIF over a 3-pin XLR balanced connector. This right here, believe it or not, is an analog audio input. So what this device does is it has this single-ended analog audio input with the RCA connectors here, and it will take that input, it will balance the signal internally, and then you can run that through the preamp and all of that stuff that is inside this unit. Really handy connection, I think, if you are a vinyl user. You can connect your turntable's preamp to this thing right here, and then that will route everything, through the balanced outputs, if you want, into whatever amplifier you are using to simplify your system that way. Okay, then we have the standard single-ended RCA analog output, and then the balanced 3-pin XLR analog outputs from the DAC and preamp section. Okay, there's the unit tour. Let's get into sound and other things. The unit does come with a pretty basic remote control. Nothing super special about it. Come on, focus camera. Anyway, that's what it looks like. It's completely functional, and yeah, it's there. It's handy if this thing is across the room. You can get to all of the major functions on this. I did find the front panel interface on this to be good enough that I didn't need to use this in a desktop setting, but if you are using it as your 2-channel DAC or something like that, that could be very, very handy. As we transition to sound, I will list some of the test gear that I used here. So getting signals into this DAC, I used direct USB from my Microsoft Surface Pro 4 laptop for a while, which is a Windows 10 based computer basically. Okay, it also used a USB input directly from a Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer. Then I also used another Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer that was routed through a Singer SU6 to connect this via both I2S and coaxial SPDIF. The stock I2S config on this is the PS Audio standard. So I adjusted my SU6 to output that standard a little bit. Like when I first connected them, the SU6 was not on that same standard, and there was a softness to the sound, and I think the channels left and right were reversed as well. So I had to change the dip switches on the SU6, although it seems like I could have changed settings on the software on this too, but it worked out either way. Once I changed the settings on the SU6, everything sounded fine again, and as it did from the other inputs. Downstream amplifiers that I use for this, I am almost exclusively a headphone listener these days, except for IEMs. Speakers drive my family nuts, so I don't do that nearly as much as I would like to, but that's neither here nor there. Head amps that I plugged into this, mostly from the balanced connections, would have been Ferrum's own OR amplifier that you see here. The Hi-Fi Golden Wave Prelude got a fair amount of time as well from the balanced connection. And then other amps that I've had in for review lately got some time in here on here too, such as the Schiit Molnir 3, the ZMF Homage, Violectric HPA V222, and then, like in a roundabout sort of way, the much cheaper X-Duo TA66 also got some time with this as a DAC in there as well. So then downstream headphones would have also been plentiful. The Utopia, which you see here, the Susvara got a fair amount of time. One thing that I will always appreciate about reviewing the Wandla and the OR is that it can handle, the OR especially can handle both the Susvara and the Utopia. Those are my 2 favorite headphones easily, and so I got to spend a lot of time with those during this review, so that was great. Okay, also the Hi-Fi HE1000 SE, the Focal Radiance, Sennheiser HD6XX, Beyerdynamic DT880, the Meze Empyrean 2, Meze Lyric 2, all of that would have made appearances at various times in here with this unit. Okay. Before we jump into the sound then, let me also talk about some of those quirks that I mentioned at the beginning, because I think that's going to impact some folks. So let me get those out of the way here. Then we'll talk about the good stuff, because the sound is the good stuff. It really is. Okay. You're going to need to do a firmware update for a good number of these units. Because when I initially got this unit, there were some bugs in it. Like when it would go into sleep mode, it would not wake up again, and I couldn't go into the menu and force it to not go to sleep, even though there's an option in the menu that says don't go to sleep. Basically, it would still go to sleep, and then it wouldn't wake up again unless you completely hard power cycled, completely disconnected the power, powered it up again, and then as soon as it like didn't receive signal for a certain amount of time, it would go to sleep, not wake up. You'd have to do the whole thing all over again. Updating to, I believe what I put on here is version 1.2.2. That cleared up a lot of the issues with that sleep issue, and it stayed awake and like active. Just, you know, touch the touch screen here and you're off and going, and if it detects signal, it would wake up again anyway, right? So that's one thing. If you get this in the box, you may have a little bit older unit. It's going to need a firmware update to get over that sleep issue. Another thing that I've noticed with it is it seems to be a little bit more sensitive to noise than some other units that I've had. Like, I mean, I have reviewed a lot of DACs and amps and all of that so far. I noticed this one that particularly for some reason in the left channel, every now and then, there would be some background hum and noise. I remember putting the Utopia on my head, and I think I was using the ZMF Homage as an amp at this particular case, and I'm like, it sounded really weird. I'm like, why is there a right bias, a strong right bias in the sound, and why does everything just sound a little bit off? Like the left ear is just very like muffled and muted and like sounding a little buzzy and all of that. And it was this unit. I isolated it too. Like if this unit was powered on, there was weirdness in the left channel. It was not affecting any of my other amplifiers or anything like that. I should take that back. If the WANDLA was on in my system, everything that was connected to it, even indirectly, because I have an XLR switch box that I go back and forth between amps and DACs and those sorts of things, like everything that was in there had that buzz in the left channel going on when this thing was connected. Unplugged the power for this thing, system went silent again, and it didn't have that buzzing or hum issue or anything in the left channel. Updating the firmware seemed to help that, and then like just taking it out of the system for a little while and then putting it back, it cleared up, and it didn't really come back until just a couple of days before I sat down to film this review again. And it wasn't really as big of a problem the second time around as it was the first time around. So I pulled it off and put it on this table by itself away from my main desk system, and it was dead quiet again. Everything sounded fine. So I interpret that to mean that for whatever reason, this unit is a little bit sensitive to ground loop, system noise, anything like that, more so than most other units that I have had. So maybe it is just this individual unit. Maybe it's a problem with the WANDLA line. I don't know. I am just reporting my experience so that you can get that report and factor that into a potential buying decision too. But now let's get to the good stuff, because the good stuff on this really is the sound, because this thing sounds fantastic. Okay. Regardless of which digital filter you use, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those changes do in just a moment, but regardless of which digital filter you use, this thing has a mostly neutral, kind of studio neutral kind of frequency response and tonality to it. It has a very even tuning and tonality in terms of like the balance between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics. Sounds very realistic, very natural, very smooth. There's very little in the way of sibilance. There's really a lot of evenness through the mid-range and all of that. Just the tone and the tuning are excellent, but they are quite neutral. It's also rather incisive. It's a very resolving and highly detailed sound. The detailed retrieval, the detailed presentation, to me is not pushed forward, so it doesn't sound aggressive or natural in that way to my ear, but it's all there, right? In fact, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, how this one like made me look at my Berkeley DAC and think, is it time? And that's because the resolution here is so good. This DAC has come the closest to my Berkeley in terms of the raw detail that it can extract from the signal of any other DAC that I have had in here. I don't know that it actually fully caught the Berkeley, more on that in a moment, but it got really, really close, which is very impressive to me because that Berkeley DAC is phenomenally resolving all of that, even though it's an older model. Again, I haven't heard anything catch it yet that I have had the pleasure of hearing here in my system. I'm sure there are DACs out there that do, just I haven't heard one yet. Okay. So the resolution is standout because room reverbs, texturing, the zizzy sound of bows being dragged across strings, just the fine details going on in the signal are resolved really well and really naturally. They're not too forward, they're not too far pulled back or anything like that. The spatial holography is also excellent. The sound stage does not stand out to me as being particularly big or particularly small. It's just kind of there, being what it needs to be. But within the sound stage, the holography and the three-dimensionality is pretty good. It does a good job of lateral imaging and separation, and in the depth dimension, being able to layer the sound and do all of that quite well as well. So it's very good in that regard. The dynamics, the impact, like that kind of thing are not standout, but they are also not poor. I would just say it's kind of average there. It's not really going for being a super impactful kind of sound, but also it's not pulled back and so smooth or relaxed in that realm that it sounds like that is lacking either. So overall, it is just a very clean, very clear, very detailed, but very neutral and fairly natural in tone and timbre kind of sound from the DAC. The digital filters do change the sound a little bit. They really don't change the tonality over the overall frequency response perception, at least not to these ears, but they do change some things in terms of like the dynamic impact and maybe a little bit in the tonal balance here and there. Like the Utopia I mentioned, like the ESS linear phase filter, because that smoothed out the treble for this particular headphone, but then like the Susvara preferred the HQ apodizing filter, which kind of did the same for that headphone as well. And I thought also like crisped up and made the imaging and the spatial presentation a little bit more holographic and real on the Susvara on that filter than it did on some of the others too. So the filters do make audible changes, and the changes that they make are bigger in magnitude than just about any other DAC that I've had come through here that has multiple filters on it and all that, but they do it without changing the overall tonal and sonic character of the unit. It just kind of gives you a little bit of flavor here and there in different areas, but offers you some customizability in the sound too. And as I understand it, Shameless and Ferrum are going to keep working together to create new digital filters for this device that will be rolled out and offered as part of firmware updates, if I understand correctly. That might be wrong, but that is my understanding based on the way they talk on their website about what they're going to be doing with that. So more changes can come in the future. All right. All of that those sonic characters that I just talked about were with the Hypsos and with the balanced and using the balanced output on this device. Let's talk about the single-ended output a little bit, because for the price of this unit, I was a little bit disappointed in the quality of the single-ended output as compared to the balanced output. If you are familiar with my channel, you have heard me rail on and on and on about how the single-ended outputs of balanced DACs tend to take a fairly noticeable performance hit as compared to the balanced output of the same DACs. I'm going to reiterate here that that's not because balanced is inherently better than single-ended. If you build a device that is designed around being balanced from the ground up, and then you build a similarly priced device that's designed from the ground up to be single-ended, we should expect them to be roughly equal, and actually maybe arguably the single-ended device sound a little bit better. I have explained why elsewhere, okay? And I can link to where I did a written explanation as to why in the description down below. But that is just me reminding you, balanced is not inherently or necessarily better, but a device that is built to be balanced, like this one is, sounds better when it's used the way it was designed and built to be, which is balanced. And the single-ended output here, as is the case with many balanced DACs, really is just there as a convenience, and there is a performance hit on it. And I was a little bit disappointed by the size of that performance hit for a device of this price. The soundstage narrowed, which is neither here nor there, but like this, the imaging and the spatial coherence of that sound field collapsed a little bit, particularly left center and left right. right felt or sounded a little bit less fleshed out to me from the single-ended output as they did from the balanced output. And that was running both of those through the OR and then volume matching as closely as I could when I switched inputs. It's not perfect. It's the best I can do with what I have here and able to do that. But that's what I was hearing there. And also the sibilance came out a little bit more using the single-ended output as compared to the balanced output. So what normally is a very smooth and well-controlled treble got a little bit rougher, I thought, from the single-ended output as compared to the balanced output on this device. So I don't recommend buying this device if you need specifically a single-ended output. I don't think that's the way to go. I think you would be better off if you needed a single-ended connection, maybe like put something like the OR as a preamp in between it, which can do a fairly decent job of converting the balanced output of this to a single-ended output and through an external preamp. That might be the way to go. All right, what does the Hypsos power supply do for you? A lot, actually. A lot of the differences that I just described in the sound from the balanced output and the single-ended output exist when you go from Hypsos to the stock power brick too. Going from the Hypsos to the stock power brick, the soundstage again narrowed a little bit. Left center and left right felt a little bit more withdrawn to me, and like there was just less information there, so there was a little bit less spatial coherence going on. I think the dynamics also took a hit with the stock power brick too, as compared to the Hypsos, which this unit, again, is not a standout in terms of its dynamics. Not poor, but it's not like one of the selling points if you're into an active, energetic, and impactful kind of sound, which I tend to be, but not always. Like the stock power brick pulled back the dynamics even more as compared to the Hypsos there. And then also that sibilance issue that I mentioned from going from balanced to single-ended here showed up again going from Hypsos to the power brick. Okay, the stock power brick is like the S's and T's got a little bit sharper in vocals and that sort of thing a little bit more often, and it was just a little bit rougher and not quite as smooth through the treble regions there again without the Hypsos. So I absolutely do recommend that you get the Hypsos to go along with the WANDLA. They are made to work together and they work very well together in there too. And I really think that the WANDLA seems to be at its best when it has a good power supply and the matching one makes sense. And together they cost like nearly $4,000. But again, my Berkeley DAC that I mentioned was a $5,500 unit when it was first released, and it would probably pull pretty close to that if it were still released today because it's still that good. Okay, so together they sound probably like they are a $4,000 DAC. It's just split over two boxes. Okay, so I do highly recommend you get the Hypsos with this unit. All right. Comparisons quickly, we'll go quickly and generally here because I just mentioned that like in terms of resolution and all of that, this came closer to my Berkeley DAC in terms of its resolving prowess and detail retrieval than any other DAC that I've had come in here for review. So there's one comparison to all of the other DACs that I've reviewed. Second most resolving DAC, second best in detail retrieval that I have had the pleasure of coming through my system. That's saying a lot. That's a trait that I value in sound, so I really appreciated its ability to do that. Okay. It is not, again, not going to be the most dynamic DAC out there either. If you want a little bit more impact, all of that, and like a warmer and smoother kind of sound, you should probably look into like a shit Yggdrasil or like a Lampezator Amber 3 or Amber 4 now kind of thing that I reviewed the Amber 3. I can put a link down into that. Like I would look into those kinds of things. The spatial holography there is like very strong. I think that is a trait that is in some ways connected to resolution and detail retrieval, but again, very strong all that. Okay, direct comparison to my Berkeley then. They are similar in their presentations insofar as they are very neutral in their tuning. They are very incisive in their detail retrieval and all of that, but they both do a really good job of not forcing the details at you and also not pulling them back, presenting them at a realistic and non-fatiguing level, at least to my ears. Where the differences showed up between the two. The Berkeley stage is a little wider yet. Soundstage size, not a measure of better or worse, it's just different and preference right there. So that is just what it is. The Berkeley edges out the Wandla, though, in terms of spatial holography, the imaging, the separation, the layering, and all of that. The Berkeley is just ahead of this one in that regard. And again, like left center and left right in particular just still sound a little bit more fleshed out to me and held together, a little bit more coherent on the Berkeley Alpha Series 2 as compared to the Wandla, but again, it's close, okay? It is very close. Another advantage that the Berkeley has, I think we'll go to. The Berkeley is more dynamic and impactful. It's got more particularly sub-bass slam to it, which is a trait that I like, so I appreciated that about that unit. So that's one thing. The other thing is the single-ended output from the Berkeley is vastly superior to the single-ended output from the Wandla. So that is one advantage there for me as a reviewer. I know I have a high-quality single-ended output coming from that Berkeley DAC, at least higher quality than what I'm getting from the Wandla. All right. Finally, the last difference that I noticed between the two, and this will be just a preference thing, is that regardless of filter that I was using, the Wandla had just a little bit more mid-bass presence to it as compared to the Berkeley. So not to the point where I would say that it's not a neutrally tuned DAC and doesn't have an overall neutral tone and tonality to it. And only really did I notice this indirect comparison to the Berkeley, is that there's just a little bit of a bloom in the mid-bass from the Wandla as compared to my reference, which is the Berkeley. And that makes the Wandla sound just slightly tubby and messy in comparison. And again, I only really noticed this when I did a rapid switch between the two, that I'm like, oh, there is just a hair, just a hint of mid-bass bloom with the Wandla that I'm not getting from the Berkeley. And that's it. But in time to wrap this up, we'll just come back to what I said, where this DAC, it's got a few software quirks, mostly mitigated by a firmware update, okay, which can be done rather simply, as long as you have a computer that you can plug in via USB to this thing, okay? So that's one thing you've got to think about. It does seem like it is a little bit more system noise sensitive than other devices that I have had in there. At least this particular unit is. I don't know if that's a problem across the line or not, but that is my experience with the Wandla. So keep that in mind as well. But assuming that you are comfortable doing a firmware update, which again is easy, okay, and quick, you're comfortable doing a firmware update and you have a very clean system where there's not a lot of noise that can go around this thing. I'm a reviewer. I got a ton of stuff on my desk, so that's not me, right? But pulling it out of that system got it away from that. So as long as you can give it that, I think that noise sensitivity will not be a problem. But very neutral and detailed sound. Excellent digital filters on the front end with several options to give you some preference and like synergy matching with different devices. They are all well done. You get lots of inputs. You can do high sampling rates if in case you want to do some external upsampling. Don't know why you would, because you've already got HQ player stuff going on in here, okay? But that's there as an option. That analog input, I think, was a nice addition in there, okay? Excellent sounding DAC that, again, came as close as any DAC ever has to making me look at my reference Berkeley Alpha Series 2 and go, is it that time? Okay, and not quite yet, but boy, did this one give it a run, okay, at least sonically, all right, and so that is pretty high praise coming from me. So, I am Wave Theory. Thanks for watching my review of the Ferrum Wandla. Stick around hopefully within the next couple of days after releasing this video. I'll do a quick re-review, some new thoughts on the matching Ferrum OR amplifier. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment if you have not already. Check out my PayPal and my Patreon, and if you're interested in buying these or the OR, please consider using my affiliate link for Audio 46 down in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.